There comes a night in almost everyone's life when the noise finally stops. No messages arrive, no one calls your name, and you are left alone with thoughts you have been avoiding for years. In that silence, fear often appears first, followed by doubt and the uncomfortable feeling that maybe you are not as strong as you pretend to be. But Buddhism teaches that this moment is not your downfall, it is your awakening. The loneliness you are trying so hard to escape may actually be preparing you to discover a deeper version of yourself. When you learn to sit peacefully in your own company, something extraordinary begins to happen. You stop begging for attention, stop chasing validation, and start building a strength that does not depend on anyone's presence. Today we will explore why being happy alone is not weakness, but one of the greatest powers a human being can develop. 1. Most people are not afraid of loneliness, they are afraid of meeting their real self. One of the deepest truths in Buddhist wisdom is that people are not truly afraid of being alone. They are afraid of what they might discover about themselves in silence. When life becomes quiet and distractions fade away, the mind starts bringing forward thoughts and emotions that were ignored for a long time. Old regrets begin to appear, past mistakes feel heavier, and hidden insecurities start speaking louder. Many people stay busy not because they love activity, but because they want to avoid this uncomfortable inner meeting. They scroll endlessly, talk constantly, or surround themselves with noise just to escape their own thoughts. However, Buddhism teaches that real growth begins when you stop running from yourself and start observing your mind with honesty. When you sit alone with patience, the confusion slowly starts to clear. You begin to understand why certain things hurt you, why you react in specific ways, and what truly matters to you. At first, this process can feel painful, like looking into a mirror you avoided for years, but with time it becomes liberating. Fear starts turning into awareness, and emotional weakness begins transforming into quiet strength. The person who has the courage to face their real self in solitude develops a deeper confidence because they are no longer controlled by hidden fears or the constant need for approval from others. 2. The world gains power over you only when you cannot stand being alone. Many people do not realize how much control the world has over their decisions simply because they are afraid of being alone. When someone feels uncomfortable in solitude, they often start seeking approval, attention, or companionship at any cost. They may agree with things they do not truly believe in, stay in relationships that slowly hurt them, or follow paths that do not match their inner truth. This happens because the fear of isolation feels stronger than the desire for personal peace. Buddhist teachings explain that attachment to belonging can make the mind weak and easily influenced. When you depend on others to feel complete, their opinions begin to shape your identity, and their presence becomes a condition for your happiness. However, the moment you learn to sit calmly with yourself, this invisible control starts breaking. You begin making choices with awareness instead of fear. You stop sacrificing your values just to avoid temporary loneliness. This shift creates a powerful sense of inner stability because now your emotional balance does not depend on who stays or who leaves. A person who is comfortable being alone cannot be easily manipulated, pressured, or distracted from their path. In this way, solitude becomes not a limitation, but a source of true freedom and personal strength. 3. Solitude breaks emotional addiction and builds inner authority. Many people believe they are simply social or friendly, but in reality, they are emotionally dependent on constant interaction. They feel restless when their phone is silent, uncomfortable when there is no one to talk to, and anxious when they are left alone with their thoughts. This is not always because they truly need connection, but because their mind has developed an addiction to stimulation and reassurance. Buddhist teachings explain that this craving for constant emotional engagement creates a hidden form of suffering. The more you depend on outside voices to feel calm or confident, the weaker your inner voice becomes. Over time, you start losing the ability to sit peacefully with yourself. You begin to escape boredom, sadness, or confusion by immediately seeking distraction instead of understanding your feelings. Solitude acts like a powerful detox for this emotional addiction. At first, it feels uncomfortable and even frightening because the mind keeps searching for noise, attention, or entertainment. Thoughts may become louder, emotions may feel heavier, and time may seem slower. However, if you remain patient and continue spending time alone with awareness, a quiet transformation begins. You start realizing that you can handle your emotions without running away. You learn to observe your thoughts instead of reacting to them. Gradually, your dependence on external validation starts fading, and a new sense of inner authority begins to grow. You become someone who can generate calmness without needing constant reassurance, and who can make decisions based on clarity rather than pressure. This inner authority is deeply powerful because it gives you control over your reactions, your direction, and your mental energy. A person who has developed this strength does not panic easily, does not follow the crowd blindly, and does not lose themselves in temporary emotional storms. Instead, they move through life with quiet confidence, knowing that their stability comes from within. Solitude, therefore, is not loneliness to be feared, but a training ground where emotional independence and true personal power are slowly built. 4. Silence reveals how much of your life was influenced by fear. One of the most uncomfortable yet transformative experiences a person can have is sitting in true silence. In the modern world, silence has almost disappeared because people constantly surround themselves with noise, conversations, music, notifications, and endless digital stimulation. At first glance, this seems normal, even necessary, but Buddhist wisdom suggests something very different. It teaches that when the mind is always busy, it rarely gets the chance to observe its own motivations clearly. When you finally allow yourself to be alone in silence, without distractions or external input, a surprising realization often begins to unfold. You start noticing how many of your past decisions were not based on genuine desire or awareness, but on hidden fear. Fear of being judged, fear of being rejected, fear of disappointing others, and fear of being misunderstood quietly shaped your choices more than you ever realized. In silence, these truths rise to the surface like reflections appearing on still water. You may suddenly recognize that certain goals you chased were never truly yours, but were influenced by societal expectations or the desire to prove your worth. You may understand that some relationships you held onto were maintained not out of love, but out of the fear of loneliness. Even the way you expressed yourself, the words you chose, and the risks you avoided might begin to look different when observed from a calm and mindful state. This realization can feel shocking because it challenges the identity you have built over time. It may bring moments of regret or confusion as you see how fear quietly directed your path. However, Buddhism does not present this awareness as something negative. Instead, it views it as the beginning of liberation. When fear is unconscious, it controls you without permission. But when fear becomes visible through silence and reflection, its power begins to weaken. You start understanding that many worries were based on imagined outcomes rather than real danger. You begin to see that approval is temporary and that true peace cannot be built on constantly trying to meet other people's expectations. Silence becomes like a teacher that gently shows you where you were living reactively instead of intentionally. As this understanding deepens, your actions slowly change. You begin making choices based on clarity rather than anxiety, based on purpose rather than pressure. This shift brings a sense of lightness and confidence because you are no longer trapped in patterns driven by fear. Over time, silence stops feeling uncomfortable and starts feeling empowering. It becomes a space where wisdom grows, where emotional wounds heal, and where the mind learns to move through life with awareness and courage instead of hesitation. 5. Being alone teaches you to create meaning instead of chasing it. Many people spend most of their lives chasing meaning without ever realizing that meaning is not something that can simply be found in achievements, relationships, or social recognition. From a young age, society teaches us that fulfillment comes from success that can be seen by others, from praise that can be heard, and from goals that can be measured. Because of this conditioning, individuals often feel restless when they are alone. They start believing that if they are not constantly moving, competing, or proving themselves, their life is somehow losing value. Buddhist wisdom offers a completely different understanding. It teaches that real meaning is not something that exists outside waiting to be discovered, but something that is quietly created through awareness, intention, and presence. Solitude provides the space necessary for this creation because it removes the pressure to perform and the temptation to compare. When you are alone, you begin to observe your thoughts more clearly and notice what truly brings you peace rather than temporary excitement. You start understanding the difference between goals that are driven by ego and actions that are guided by purpose. At first, this shift can feel confusing because the mind is used to measuring worth through visible progress and external approval. You may question whether simple moments of stillness, reflection, or focused effort have any real importance. However, as you spend more time in solitude, your perspective slowly changes. You begin to appreciate experiences that once felt ordinary, such as completing a task with full attention, walking in nature without distraction, or simply sitting quietly and observing your breath. These moments begin to feel meaningful not because someone else recognizes them, but because they strengthen your awareness and connection with the present moment. Buddhism explains that chasing meaning through constant comparison creates endless dissatisfaction, while creating meaning through mindful living builds deep contentment. When you stop looking for validation outside and start cultivating intention within, your actions gain a quiet power. You work not to impress, but to grow. You speak not to be noticed, but to express truth, and you rest not out of laziness, but to restore clarity. Over time, this approach transforms the way you view success and fulfillment. Instead of feeling pressured to match other people's timelines or expectations, you begin trusting your own pace and direction. Solitude becomes a workshop where purpose is shaped slowly and authentically. You realize that life does not need to be loud or dramatic to be meaningful. It can be steady, mindful, and deeply satisfying. The more you learn to create meaning from within, the less dependent you become on external circumstances. This independence brings a profound sense of freedom because your happiness is no longer postponed until something big happens. You start experiencing value in everyday actions, and this awareness makes your journey feel richer and more complete. In this way, being alone stops feeling like emptiness and starts feeling like a powerful opportunity to design a life that is guided by wisdom rather than by pressure or comparison. 6. Emotional independence is the highest form of strength. In life, many people focus on becoming physically strong or intellectually successful, but very few truly understand the power of emotional independence. From childhood, individuals are conditioned to seek comfort, reassurance, and approval from others whenever they feel uncertain or afraid. While support and connection are natural parts of human life, Buddhism teaches that depending completely on others for emotional stability can create deep suffering. When your peace is tied to someone's presence, mood, or validation, You begin living in constant fear of losing that support. Small changes in relationships start affecting your confidence, and unexpected events can easily disturb your inner balance. Emotional independence, on the other hand, develops when you learn to sit with your feelings instead of immediately trying to escape them. Solitude plays a powerful role in this process because it removes the habit of running toward distractions or external comfort. When you are alone, you are gently forced to face sadness, anxiety, frustration, and uncertainty with awareness rather than avoidance. At first, this experience may feel overwhelming because the mind is not used to handling emotions without outside help. Thoughts may become intense, and the urge to seek reassurance can feel very strong. However, Buddhist wisdom encourages patience and mindfulness during these moments. By observing your feelings without judgment, you begin to understand that emotions are temporary waves rather than permanent realities. This understanding reduces fear and builds resilience. Gradually, you start realizing that you are capable of calming your mind, guiding your reactions, and finding stability within yourself. This realization brings a profound shift in how you experience life. You no longer panic when circumstances change or when people behave differently than expected. Instead, you respond with greater clarity and maturity because your sense of security comes from inner awareness rather than external control. As emotional independence grows, your relationships also begin to transform. You become able to care for others without clinging to them and to support them without losing your own balance. Love becomes more compassionate and less possessive because it is no longer driven by fear of abandonment. This balance creates healthier connections and deeper mutual respect. At the same time, you develop a quiet confidence that does not need constant affirmation. You trust your decisions, respect your boundaries, and remain grounded even in challenging situations. Buddhism teaches that true strength is not about dominating others or suppressing feelings, but about mastering your inner world with wisdom and calmness. Emotional independence represents this mastery. It allows you to move through life with dignity and stability, knowing that your peace cannot be easily shaken by temporary events or changing opinions. Over time, this inner strength becomes one of the greatest sources of freedom, enabling you to live authentically and fearlessly while maintaining compassion for yourself and others. 7. Your greatest rise will begin after your loneliest season. There comes a period in almost every human life when everything suddenly feels quiet, uncertain, and emotionally distant. Plans that once seemed clear begin to fall apart. Relationships that once felt permanent start fading, and the support systems that once gave comfort no longer feel reliable. During this time, a person often experiences a deep sense of loneliness that is difficult to explain to others. It is not simply about being physically alone. It is about feeling as though the familiar world has shifted and left you standing in an unfamiliar space. Buddhism teaches that these seasons of isolation are not random misfortunes, but powerful turning points in the journey of self-awakening. When external distractions weaken and emotional noise reduces, life creates the conditions necessary for inner transformation. However, most people misunderstand this phase and see it only as loss or failure. They resist it, try to escape it, or distract themselves from the discomfort instead of recognizing the silent opportunity hidden within it. Loneliness often feels heavy because it removes the illusions that once provided psychological comfort. The illusion that certain people will always remain, the illusion that life will follow a predictable path, and the illusion that happiness depends on constant companionship begin to dissolve. This process can be painful because the human mind naturally seeks security and familiarity. When these foundations start shaking, fear and confusion can arise. Yet Buddhism reminds us that growth rarely happens inside comfort. Just as a seed must break open in darkness before it can reach sunlight, the human spirit often needs to pass through uncertainty before discovering its real strength. During lonely seasons, you are given the space to examine your beliefs, question your attachments, and redefine your priorities. You begin to see which desires were influenced by social pressure and which values genuinely resonate with your inner truth. This clarity does not appear overnight, but it gradually forms as you spend time observing your thoughts with patience. In solitude, you start developing qualities that cannot be easily cultivated in constant social activity. You learn discipline because there is no one to push you forward. You learn emotional endurance because there is no immediate comfort to rely on. You learn self-trust because decisions must come from your own awareness rather than collective opinion. These lessons may feel demanding at first, but they slowly reshape your character. You become more mindful of how you use your time, more intentional about the direction of your life, and more resilient when facing uncertainty. Buddhism teaches that the mind becomes clearer when it is not overwhelmed by external expectations. In lonely moments, the noise of comparison begins to fade, allowing you to hear your own inner guidance more clearly. This inner voice often reveals insights that were previously drowned out by distractions. Another powerful transformation that occurs during lonely seasons is the shift from seeking validation to cultivating self-respect. When you are surrounded by people, it is easy to measure your worth based on their reactions. Praise can inflate the ego, and criticism can weaken confidence. However, when you are alone for extended periods, you begin building a relationship with yourself that is independent of public opinion. You start recognizing your strengths without needing applause and acknowledging your weaknesses without feeling ashamed. This honest self-reflection strengthens emotional stability because your identity becomes rooted in awareness rather than approval. Buddhism emphasizes that true freedom arises when you are no longer controlled by the desire to be constantly understood or accepted. Loneliness can accelerate this realization by forcing you to stand on your own psychological foundation. Over time, the very solitude that once felt painful begins to feel empowering. You notice that your reactions become calmer and your thoughts more organized. Situations that once caused anxiety start feeling manageable because you have developed the habit of observing instead of panicking. This shift creates a sense of quiet confidence that is difficult to describe but deeply transformative. You realize that you are capable of creating peace within yourself even when external circumstances remain uncertain. This realization changes how you approach challenges. Instead of fearing failure or rejection, you start seeing difficulties as opportunities to strengthen awareness. Buddhism teaches that suffering loses its intensity when it is met with understanding rather than resistance. Loneliness, when approached with mindfulness, becomes a powerful teacher that guides you toward this understanding. As inner growth continues, new possibilities often begin to appear in unexpected ways. Opportunities arise that align more closely with your authentic values, and relationships form that are based on mutual respect rather than emotional dependency. This is not a coincidence, but a natural outcome of transformation. When your mindset changes, your perception of the world changes as well. You become more selective about where you invest your energy and more grateful for meaningful experiences. Success begins to feel less like a competition and more like an expression of your inner clarity. Buddhism explains that when attachment weakens and awareness strengthens, life flows with greater harmony. The rise that follows loneliness is not always dramatic or immediate, but it is deeply rooted and sustainable because it is built on self-knowledge. Eventually, you reach a point where you can look back at your loneliest season with a completely different perspective. What once felt like abandonment begins to look like preparation. What once seemed like emptiness reveals itself as space that allowed new strength to grow. You understand that solitude was not meant to isolate you forever, but to help you rediscover your independence and purpose. This realization brings gratitude instead of resentment. You start appreciating the lessons learned during that difficult phase because they shaped your resilience and deepened your compassion for others who are going through similar struggles. Buddhism teaches that wisdom often emerges from suffering when it is embraced with awareness. The rise that follows loneliness is not just about external achievements. It is about becoming someone who can remain peaceful in chaos, focused in distraction, and kind even in uncertainty. In the end, your greatest rise truly begins after your loneliest season, because that is when you stop seeking completion outside and start cultivating completeness within. This inner transformation creates a stable foundation for everything that follows. Relationships become healthier because they are no longer driven by fear of loss. Goals become clearer because they are guided by genuine intention. Life becomes more meaningful because it is experienced with mindfulness rather than restlessness. The loneliness that once felt like a heavy burden becomes a powerful memory of growth, reminding you that even the darkest phases can lead to profound awakening. Through this journey, you discover that real strength is not about never feeling alone, but about learning how to stand confidently in solitude until your inner light becomes strong enough to guide your path forward. 8. When you learn to walk alone, you stop living in fear of losing anyone. There is a silent fear that lives inside many human hearts, and it often goes unnoticed because it hides behind normal behavior and everyday choices. This fear is not always about failure, danger, or uncertainty. It is the fear of losing people. Many individuals shape their lives around this hidden anxiety. They stay quiet when they want to speak, they adjust their dreams to fit someone else's expectations, and they carry emotional burdens that are not truly theirs, simply because they are afraid that walking their own path might lead to separation. Buddhism teaches that this fear is deeply connected to attachment. When we believe that our happiness, identity, or security depends entirely on the presence of certain people, we begin to live cautiously, constantly protecting relationships, even at the cost of our inner peace. This creates a life that may look stable from the outside, but feels heavy and restricted from within. Learning to walk alone does not mean rejecting love or isolating yourself from the world. Instead, it means developing the inner strength to move forward even when companionship is uncertain. It is about understanding that relationships are valuable but not permanent, and that your personal growth should not be paused out of fear of being misunderstood or left behind. When life places you in situations where you must rely on your own decisions and emotional resilience, you begin to experience a powerful transformation. At first, this process can feel uncomfortable because the mind is used to seeking reassurance. Doubts may arise, and the absence of familiar support may create moments of loneliness. However, Buddhism encourages mindful acceptance of these feelings rather than resistance. By observing fear without immediately reacting to it, you gradually weaken its influence over your actions. As you continue walking alone with awareness, you start noticing subtle changes in your mindset. You become less dependent on constant communication to feel connected and less anxious about how others perceive your choices. This does not make you cold or distant. Instead, it makes you grounded and authentic. You begin valuing relationships for what they are rather than clinging to them out of insecurity. This shift creates emotional freedom because you are no longer living in anticipation of loss. Instead of trying to control outcomes, you learn to trust the natural flow of connection and separation. Buddhism reminds us that everything in life is impermanent, and accepting this truth allows us to experience love more deeply without fear. When you are not constantly worried about who might leave, you become more present with those who are here. Walking alone also strengthens your ability to listen to your inner guidance. When external opinions are no longer the loudest influence, your intuition begins to surface with greater clarity. You start recognizing which paths align with your values and which choices are driven by temporary comfort. This awareness helps you make decisions that support long-term growth rather than short-term approval. Over time, your confidence becomes rooted in self-trust rather than social validation. Buddhism teaches that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. Each step you take alone becomes a small victory over the anxiety that once limited your potential. Another important realization that emerges from this journey is the understanding that loss is not always negative. Sometimes people leave because your direction is changing, and sometimes distance creates the space necessary for personal evolution. When you stop viewing separation as a failure, you begin to see it as part of life's natural rhythm. This perspective reduces emotional resistance and allows healing to happen more smoothly. Instead of holding on to relationships that no longer support your growth, you learn to release them with gratitude and compassion. Buddhism emphasizes the importance of non-attachment, not as indifference but as wisdom. By loving without clinging, you create room for healthier connections to form in the future. As inner strength continues to develop, the fear of loneliness gradually loses its power. You realize that being alone does not mean being abandoned, it means being self-reliant. This independence changes how you interact with the world. You speak more honestly, set clearer boundaries, and pursue goals that once felt intimidating. The energy that was previously spent worrying about others' reactions becomes available for creativity, learning, and meaningful action. This transformation often inspires others as well, because they see in you a calm confidence that does not depend on external circumstances. Buddhism teaches that when one person awakens to their inner strength, their presence can quietly encourage others to begin their own journey. Eventually, you reach a stage where the thought of losing someone no longer creates panic or despair. Instead, you respond with acceptance and understanding, knowing that your life's direction is guided by awareness rather than fear. This does not eliminate sadness or emotional pain, but it changes how you process them. You allow feelings to arise and pass naturally, trusting that your stability will remain intact. Walking alone becomes a symbol of empowerment rather than isolation. It represents the ability to move forward with dignity, compassion, and clarity, regardless of changing circumstances. In the end, learning to walk alone teaches one of the most profound lessons in Buddhist philosophy. True security cannot be found in external attachments, but in the cultivation of inner peace. When you stop living in fear of losing people, you start living with greater authenticity and freedom. Relationships become expressions of shared growth instead of sources of anxiety. Decisions become reflections of wisdom instead of reactions to pressure. Life begins to feel lighter, not because challenges disappear, but because you carry within yourself the strength to face them. Through this transformation, solitude becomes not a barrier, but a bridge leading toward self-mastery, emotional balance, and a deeper appreciation of the present moment. 9. When you become comfortable with yourself, the need to prove yourself disappears. One of the quiet struggles that shapes human behavior is the constant desire to prove worth to others. From early childhood, many people are conditioned to believe that they must achieve, impress, or perform in order to be accepted. This pressure slowly becomes a habit of the mind, influencing how individuals speak, act, and even think about themselves. They measure their value through comparison, recognition, and approval, often without realizing how exhausting this invisible race can become. Buddhism teaches that this need to prove oneself is deeply connected to attachment to identity and fear of rejection. When a person is not comfortable in their own presence, they begin searching outside for confirmation that they matter. They may work harder than necessary, speak louder than they feel, or pursue goals that do not truly resonate with their inner purpose, simply to feel seen and validated. Over time, this creates emotional fatigue and a sense of disconnection from authentic self-expression. Solitude offers a powerful antidote to this cycle because it removes the audience that fuels the need for performance. When you spend meaningful time alone, you are no longer required to maintain an image or justify your choices. This absence of external pressure can initially feel unsettling because the mind is used to defining itself through reactions from others. Without applause or criticism, you may wonder who you truly are beyond roles and expectations. Buddhism encourages embracing this uncertainty as an opportunity rather than a threat. In the stillness of solitude, you begin to observe your motivations more clearly. You start noticing which actions arise from genuine interest and which are driven by the desire to impress. This awareness gradually dissolves the compulsion to constantly prove your worth. As this transformation unfolds, your relationship with achievement also begins to change. You continue striving for growth and excellence, but the emotional urgency attached to success starts fading. Instead of seeing accomplishments as a way to secure validation, you begin viewing them as expressions of learning and contribution. This shift creates a healthier mindset because your self-esteem no longer fluctuates with every outcome. Failures become lessons rather than personal verdicts, and successes become moments of gratitude rather than sources of ego. Buddhism emphasizes the importance of non-attachment to results, teaching that peace arises when effort is guided by mindfulness rather than by the fear of judgment. When you are comfortable with yourself, you can engage fully in life without being consumed by the need to constantly demonstrate your value. Another important change that occurs during this journey is the development of authentic confidence. Unlike confidence that depends on praise or comparison, authentic confidence grows quietly through self-understanding. In solitude, you learn to appreciate your strengths without exaggeration and to acknowledge your limitations without shame. You begin trusting your intuition because you spend time listening to it rather than silencing it with external noise. This trust reduces the anxiety that often accompanies social interactions and decision-making. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself excessively or to compete for attention. Your presence becomes calm and grounded because it is rooted in acceptance rather than in insecurity. Buddhism teaches that true dignity arises from inner harmony, and this harmony becomes possible when the mind is no longer preoccupied with proving its worth. As the need for validation decreases, relationships also become more genuine and balanced. You start connecting with others from a place of openness rather than from a hidden agenda of seeking approval. Conversations feel lighter because you are not constantly monitoring how you are perceived. You listen more deeply and express yourself more honestly, creating space for mutual understanding. At the same time, you become less affected by criticism because your identity is not entirely shaped by others' opinions. This resilience allows you to maintain compassion even in difficult interactions. Buddhism reminds us that attachment to praise and aversion to blame are two sides of the same coin. When you transcend both, you gain emotional freedom and stability. The disappearance of the need to prove yourself also influences how you approach time and productivity. Instead of filling every moment with activity to appear busy or successful, you begin valuing mindful action and purposeful rest. You understand that life is not a performance to be constantly displayed, but an experience to be lived with awareness. This perspective reduces stress and enhances creativity Because your energy is no longer drained by unnecessary comparison, you become more focused on personal growth than on social competition. Over time, this mindset leads to achievements that feel meaningful because they align with your inner values rather than with external expectations. Buddhism teaches that right intention is more important than outward recognition, and solitude helps you cultivate this clarity of intention. Eventually, you reach a stage where self-acceptance becomes a natural part of your daily experience. You recognize that your worth does not increase with applause or decrease with silence. This realization brings a deep sense of peace because you are no longer trapped in the endless cycle of seeking validation. The mind becomes quieter and the heart feels lighter. You move through life with a steady confidence that does not need to announce itself. This confidence allows you to pursue goals, build relationships, and face challenges without the constant burden of proving yourself. Buddhism describes this state as liberation from ego-driven suffering, where actions arise from wisdom rather than from insecurity. In the end, becoming comfortable with yourself is not about withdrawing from the world, but about engaging with it from a place of inner completeness. Solitude serves as the training ground for this transformation, teaching you to observe your thoughts, understand your motivations, and release unnecessary attachments. When the need to prove yourself disappears, life becomes more authentic and fulfilling. You begin to act with sincerity, speak with clarity, and rest with contentment. This quiet strength not only benefits your personal journey, but also inspires those around you to question their own patterns of comparison and self-doubt. Through this process, you realize that true power lies not in convincing others of your worth, but in recognizing it within yourself. In the end, the journey of learning to be happy alone is not about separating yourself from the world, but about discovering a deeper connection with your own mind and existence. Buddhism teaches that suffering often begins when we believe our happiness must be secured through people, possessions, or constant external reassurance. We spend years chasing approval, fearing rejection, and trying to hold on to situations that were never meant to stay forever. However, solitude slowly reveals a different truth. It shows that peace does not come from controlling life, but from understanding it. When you become comfortable in your own presence, you stop seeing loneliness as a threat and start seeing it as a teacher. Through silence and self-reflection, you begin to notice how much unnecessary pressure you once carried just to feel accepted. You understand that real strength is not about always being surrounded by others, but about being emotionally stable even when you stand alone. This stability changes the way you experience relationships, success, and even failure. You start loving without fear, working without comparison, and living without the constant need to prove your worth. Buddhism reminds us that everything in life is temporary, including companionship and challenges. Accepting this impermanence does not make life cold or meaningless. Instead, it makes every moment more precious and authentic. As you continue walking your path with awareness, you realize that solitude was never meant to isolate you forever. It was meant to prepare you. It was meant to help you build inner clarity, patience, and resilience, so that when opportunities and connections appear again, you can experience them from a place of wisdom rather than desperation. The person who once feared being alone eventually becomes someone who can bring calmness into chaos and confidence into uncertainty. This transformation is quiet but powerful, like a flame that grows stronger in still air. So, if you are currently in a season of loneliness, do not see it as punishment or failure. See it as a sacred phase of growth. Life may be removing distractions so you can finally meet your real self. Trust that this process is shaping you into someone who no longer depends on constant validation to feel complete. One day, you will look back and understand that the moments you spent alone were not empty. They were building the strongest version of you, and when that strength becomes visible, you will walk through life with a peaceful mind, an open heart, and an unshakable sense of inner power.